Hello, it's me, back again, for the first time in, 6 months or so, as I tend to do. You're probably wondering, or not, as the case may be, what's going on? Why do you keep, for want of a better word, fucking off for long periods of time? And there's a good question. There's a good answer to that, and the answer is that I've been working on cars and working at work, um, and therefore the concept of video production has sort of fallen by the wayside. Um, However, progress on the car is actually going quite well. We'll go over what's going on with the Dolomite in this video. I say what's going on with the Dolomite. My videos on the Dolomite are so far behind at this point, it's kind of ridiculous. So I'm going to try and push out a couple of videos in the next couple of weeks to basically bring us up to now, real time. So yeah, what's been going on? Dolomite restoration. Had to do all the bodywork, get it welded up, put a new engine in it. Lots of fun stuff. And didn't go quite as quickly as I would have hoped. Some COVID-y type stuff got in the way. The Acclaim got in the way. It went in for a little patch of welding to the anti-roll bar mount, and yeah, it didn't exist. It ceased existing, basically. So that got in the way. Bought a Volvo 740. That was rotten. That got in the way. Went in the bin. Bought another Volvo 740. That was also rotten, but got welded up, so that got in the way. Just lots of stuff got in the way, basically. But progress has happened, and now it's summertime. So let's get caught up and get caught up. Let's do it. So this is just a bit of a reminder as to how rotten the front of the car really was. As you can see, that headlight retainer has been reduced to 1 bolt hole out of 4, and the edge of the front valance and wing is basically completely gone, and even underneath the shiny paint it was rotten from the inside out, so it all had to get cut away, resulting in this. That was most of the rot kind of removed. You can see straight to the chassis rail there at the end as well, which is nice. Here you can see some of the bits that were cut off the front that were just completely perforated all the way through. This was actually the first bit of metalwork that was done to the car. Everything below the rubbing strip was cut off and a large dent was pulled out of the door. So this here is a roughed up indicator mount and side light mount. This is a section of the front valance where it meets the front wing. Quite a complicated shape on these cars as it bends in 3 different ways, and the indicator sits proud. Here's some more new metalwork let into the front chassis mount, the headlight surround area, and the splash panel that kind of sits here ahead of the front wheel. Basically all of this was completely absent on the car originally. So here are the panels that went in to make up the repairs to the front wing and nose panel. All of this was fabricated from scratch. Panels are available in a mixture of fiberglass and steel, but they're beyond my budget at the time. This side is roughed up in filler, just to get an idea of the shape. The actual metalwork itself was leaded in, just to keep it all metal. As you can see in here, we've also got new headlight retaining panels, and you know, the difference between this and the rotten original is quite insane. I should say at this point that this work you're seeing here was not done by me. I lack the ability to weld things and make them look nice. I can barely stick things together. This was all the work of a fellow who goes by the name of Ginger Nuts on the Autoshite forum. And yeah, pretty crazy work considering this all started off as flat sheets of steel, and
you know, there was very little of the car left to go off to build the shape up because it was just gone, which is kind of crazy. This is some of my handiwork. This is the inner wing area, sort of behind the front wheel. This all gets splashed with mud and rots out, so there was quite a lot of new metal had to go in here. You can also see the sill end cap and jacking point that I was building up there. Just all crumbled to dust, to be honest. Now, we knew that the rear of the car was going to be quite rough due to the pot riveted arches, but the inner arch was a lot rougher than expected, and the rear jacking point and back end of the sill was completely missing. We also had to fabricate all that from scratch. As you can see here, a plate had been welded in at the back at some point and just blown through the metal and left a little MIG wire forest. Plenty to do. Here is another bit that needed welded up, the boot floor and rear arch area. So this is how I managed to make it look, and of course the other side was just as bad, although a neater job. Here is some of the relatively few panels we bought. The inner arch was made out of a modified Mark II Golf inner arch. It was the only thing that was vaguely close, and although it needed a lot of modding to fit, we also managed to acquire a couple of new old stock wheel arch panels, although that one was only half of one. On the other side, although I managed to get a full panel, it did have to be cut in half in order to actually get it to line up, as the quality of the pressings on these old panels aren't great, and at £120 a side they're quite expensive as well, considering they used to be $40 for a pair. Here is the car with most of the welding done by this point, and quite a lot of the bodywork kind of roughed in with filler, kind of painted in primer, so you can get a feel for the kind of shape of the car coming back as a whole. You can see there the front wing and sill area still to be finished, but by this point it was it was coming on, and it was also driving in and out of the garage, because by this point it also had its new engine. So for engines, first up was a very kindly donated Mark IV Spitfire engine, which was entirely free, but was unfortunately not really in much better condition than the engine that came out of the car. Although not completely destroyed, it still worn away its thrust washers, and all the bearings were wrecked. Basically, the oil pump was wrecked. Odd corrosion around the coolant passages in the block and head were quite concerning. Really, although it could be rebuilt into a decent engine, it was going to need the works, from a rebore to the crank being reground and polished and the head being skimmed and just all the usual stuff, really. So it wasn't going to be a cheap option. So then something much more interesting cropped up in the form of a 1300 engine from a front wheel drive car, which meant that it was going to be an earlier small journal crank engine, same as in a Triumph Herald or a Mark III Spitfire, which would be more worthy of investing in to bring it up to good standard. Now, a friend of mine actually saw this engine for sale down near Chesterfield, and he built the engine for me, having collected it, with 20 thou overboard pistons and 30 thou oversized mains, and maybe it was just mains, can't remember. Maybe not big ends as well. And basically completely rebuilt the block, and as you can see, it's come up really rather well. So there was just the slight concern that none of us really knew if you could get a 1300 front wheel drive engine to play nice with a rear wheel drive car. So it was slightly worrying at points, but courtesy of a timing cover from a Herald 1250 engine that I have stashed in the basement, as you do, and nicking the crank seal and things off of it, we managed to convert it to work with a rear-wheel drive car, which was nice. However, this victory was fairly short-lived, as soon as the engine was in, it was back out again. The reason being that when the engine shop had polished the crank and cleaned everything up, they'd taken a slight amount of material off the faces where the thrust washers sit, which are little half-moon bronze washers that take up the fore and aft movement in the crank. And when they'd cleaned up the metal, they'd actually pushed the block out of tolerance, which meant we couldn't get thrust washers that were oversized enough to take up the slack, and the crank was moving back and forth and binding up on the fillets, which was subpar. So we came up with an odd solution in that we couldn't find anybody to make solid bronze thrust washers for us. So we used tin shims for a tractor. Time will tell if this will be a lasting repair, or whether the engine will launch itself in short order. Now, with that in position, it meant that the only thing left to do was to run the engine in, which was a case of starting it and holding it at 2000 RPM-ish until it was up to temperature. So if it's going to blow up at any point, it's going to be then.
Hold it a bit there, right? And just vary it up and down. Down a bit. Up a wee bit. That's perfect. Oil pressure. Sounds good. It does. Not made up for that. Get a blip.
And so, with the car running and driving and 90% of the welding done, I did the right thing and I sat it underneath a tarp in the driveway for about a year while I did other things. So I guess we'll finish the story in the next episode.